it's a real privilege and an honor to chair this important panel, both because of the importance of the subject and also because of the uh, absolute distinction of the speakers. I just want to briefly say that we're going to be discussing the creation of the US National Green Bank, which would have $100 billion of equity and whose mission would be to direct flows to fund investment into the transformation to create good jobs in the US economy and mitigate global warming. And both are very urgent tasks, and in particular, the planet cannot wait. I think they're very important precedents, both in the US, particularly in historical times like the 30s New Deal, and a very rich international experience, which shows the urgent need for the US to have a national green investment bank of a significant scale. In fact, it's interesting that the US, in a splurge of idealism after the Second World War, created the German Development Bank with Marshall funds, with the Marshall Plan, and at the time didn't create one in the US, which is a bit of a paradox. And since then, KfW, as well as many development banks worldwide, have supported the green transformation, SMEs, innovation, and many activities, and do so on an important scale. I think it's important to stress that development banks worldwide, regional and national and multilateral, have a total of over $11 trillion of assets and lend worldwide 2.3 trillion annually, which actually represents about 10% of world investment. So they are very big actors. And I think just one quick comment about the fact of the size of the capital which is being proposed. 100 billion seems a very reasonable capitalization, because if we compare it to the massive scale required, and also to similar institutions, the European Union has a similar institution called the European Investment Bank, and we will be privileged to hear his vice president speaking, and it lends to all EU countries. And the EU has a very similar, actually, level of GDP to that of the US, slightly lower. And the capital base of the EIB is $300 billion, half of which goes 150 billion to fund, since 2025, climate and green oriented projects. So the scale we can see is proportional both to the needs, but also to the international comparison. I will leave the privilege of introducing Senator Van Hollen to Jeff Shub in a minute, but I want to introduce now the other two speakers, starting with Ambroise Fayol, who's Senior Vice President of the European Investment Bank, and who plays the key role within the EIB of leading on climate action and renewable projects, as well as on development internationally. He's had a very distinguished career, both at the French Treasury Department, at the World Bank, and the IMF, including as board member for 6 years. And Ambroise Fayol will be followed by Rémi Rioux, who's also had a very distinguished career, first in the Treasury, in the French Treasury and Foreign Affairs, including a major role in the Paris COP, which led to the Paris Agreement. Currently, he has two important posts. Firstly, since 2016, he's CEO of the Agence Française de Développement, which lends French funds to developing economies and emerging economies. And he's particularly relevant for this, chair of the International Development Finance Club, which groups the 26 largest development banks worldwide, and led the initiative of the Finance in Common Summit, which was the first summit of development banks late last year. There were 450 development banks represented. So I would now like to ask Jeff to please introduce Senator Van Hollen. Thank you very much to all.
Hi, thank you so much, Stephanie. Really a pleasure to be a part of this discussion. It's definitely an honor to introduce Senator Van Hollen. I'm going to take 30 seconds to provide the background and context of where federal policy is in the United States. Very, very quickly, the first bill was introduced by then Representative Van Hollen back in 2009. He has continued to introduce bills in the intervening decade while the bottle spread and grew around the US at the state level, where state green banks have now driven $7 billion of clean energy investment with less than $2 billion of public green bank capital. And Senator Van Hollen led the reintroduction of this legislation in 2019 and then again in 2021. The policy has passed the House of Representatives twice in 2020. It has bipartisan support in the House of Representatives. Senator Van Hollen's policy is expressly endorsed by the President of the United States as part of his American Jobs Plan infrastructure package. And my organization, the Coalition for Green Capital, has the privilege of working closely with his office day in, day out, trying to get this bill implemented. Senator Van Hollen was elected to the U.S. Senate from Maryland in 2016 after previously serving 14 years in the U.S. House of Representatives. And prior to that, he served 12 years in the Maryland House of Delegates and Senate. So the senator has been a proud representative of the people of Maryland for 30 years now. His top priorities include creating more and better jobs, strengthening small businesses, and increasing educational and job training opportunities for individuals of all ages in every community. Senator Van Hollen is proud to have worked successfully with members of both parties to pass bipartisan legislation whenever possible, and he has become known for working hard to find common sense solutions to difficult national issues. And if I may say so, I'd say a national green bank is the epitome of a common sense solution for difficult national issues. As I said, we have had the pleasure at the Coalition for Green Capital and our CEO, Reed Hundt, of working alongside Senator Van Hollen and before that Representative Van Hollen as a tireless champion for the National Green Bank going back 2009. He is our chief ally and advocate, and we would not be as close to this policy today without his tireless efforts and leadership pushing this policy in Congress and with the White House and around the country and now around the world. And so with that, I am proud to turn things over to Senator Van Hollen. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, Jeff, thank you. And let me thank you for your leadership as Executive Director of the Coalition for Green Capital, and to Reed Hundt, the founder and CEO, and to the whole Coalition for Green Capital family. It's been an honor to work with you over these years to spread the word about the importance of green banks. And now, of course, we're at a critical moment here in the United States Congress. I also just want to say how pleased I am to be joining other members of this panel. Professor Griffith Jones, thank you for your many contributions in thinking to this important area. And you've introduced Remy Rue, as well as Amos Fayol. It's good to be with all of you, and it's good to be with people tuning in from around the world, because I do think this is such an important part of a global solution. And I do think here in the United States, we have a lot to learn from our partners around the world who have developed, have development banks and have deployed them toward green capital. So I'm looking forward to getting the full results from this conversation at the end of the day. Look, I don't need to convince everybody on this call about the merits of the green bank, but we still do have to persuade many of our colleagues here in the United States. So I'm just going to take a moment to talk about the benefits. We all know that the costs of doing nothing in the face of climate change are rising by the moment. Doing nothing is costing Americans and people around the world a lot in terms of lost time and lost opportunity. Of course, the impact and costs of climate change. Those are going up by the day, and people are going to be paying more and more in terms of life and treasure if we don't act more quickly. But The idea behind the Green Bank, of course, is we focus not just on the cost of doing nothing, but the opportunities that exist from these investments in clean energy and energy efficiency, putting people to work around the world here in the United States, generating homegrown jobs. And that is why, President Biden has included this kind of proposal within his American Jobs Plan, because he recognizes the direct connection between these investments in clean energy and energy efficiency to address climate change, but also to create these great opportunities. And it is very timely that we gather here as an international discussion to share ideas. That was the idea behind the Coalition for Green Capital from the beginning. As Jeff mentioned in his opening comments, I've been working with Reed Hunt and this coalition since around 2008, when I introduced the Green Bank bill in the House of Representatives. It was included in a major piece of energy legislation that passed the House at that time. It was called the Waxman-Markey bill. This was part of that bill under the name of the National Clean Energy Accelerator. That bill passed the House of Representatives, but back then in 2009, it stalled here where I am now in the United States Senate. But the fact that it did not get through the Senate did not mean that it was not an idea that was picked up by others around the country. And in my state of Maryland, one of the counties I used to represent in the Congress became the first county in the United States to adopt its own Green Bank model. Member of the county council at the time, Roger Berliner, introduced it. And Maryland has since developed 3 Green Bank type entities for providing capital, loan guarantees, and other financial help to those who want to launch clean energy projects or energy efficiency. And in fact, if you look around our country, you can see very politically diverse states having adopted this model. Ohio, Maryland, Florida, Hawaii, and many others. Red states and blue states and purple states have all seen that this is an important tool. Those green banks, climate banks in the United States, have generated more than $5.3 billion in clean energy investment. And while that is a very important contribution to the effort, you can see that in order to get to the kind of scale we need, as the professor mentioned, we really need to take this national. In fact, the National Academies of Sciences and Engineering and Medicine projected just this past February that we'll need to mobilize $2 trillion in clean energy investments over the next 10 years here to meet our climate goals. So that's why Senator Markey and I have reintroduced our National Climate Bank legislation that would capitalize $100 billion investment in a nonprofit bank that would be established through this legislation. That $100 billion would be financed over a 5-year period. And it's estimated that that investment would generate 4 million jobs here in the United States. That idea was, as Jeff mentioned, incorporated in a bill that passed the House of Representatives already. It's under the name of the Clean Energy Accelerator. And so that is what we're referring to this as at this point in time. But as all of you know, and that this public investment can be a magnet. It has the multiplier effect. We estimate that for every dollar put into the accelerator, we'll draw up to $5 in private investment. We also, in our legislation, direct a lot of the resources to areas that have been underserved in the United States and have been where a lot of power plants have historically located, leading to all sorts of issues of asthma and other disease and higher morbidity rates. And that's a very important part of the charter for this clean energy accelerator. So where do we stand right now? Well, the good news is, as was mentioned, this idea has been fully adopted in President Biden's proposal. I think he proposed about $27 billion. We are pushing for the higher number. Right now, in the United States Senate, we're trying to figure out how to structure this within what we call the budget reconciliation process. I'm not going to take you down a deep rabbit hole in terms of Senate procedure, but the bottom line is that unfortunately, we do not yet have, despite efforts, Senate Republican support. That means that this particular provision would have to pass the Senate with every one of the 50 Democratic senators supporting it. And of course, the Vice President of the United States casts the deciding vote. In order to use that procedure and avoid a filibuster, we need to get the Senate parliamentarian to determine that this legislation, as it's designed, would be permissible under those rules. So we're in that process right now. This, as I said, has passed the House, and I'm confident that in whatever package the American Jobs Plan ultimately passes the House, it will be included there. And we're working, as I said, to make sure that happens in the United States Senate. So I look forward again to getting feedback at the end of the day from my team that's on. Unfortunately, I've got to go do some Senate business right now, but I will say on the international front, we're also pushing hard that the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, our International Development Finance Corporation, invest more of its resources in this area of clean energy. And while I'd like to see them be even more aggressive than their current plans provide, I was pleased to see that under this administration, the DFC has said that at least 33% of its new investments will be made in climate-related projects around the world beginning in fiscal year 2023. And in other legislation that just passed the Senate, not the House yet, we increased the U.S. government commitment to the DFC from $60 billion to $100 billion, not to be confused with the $100 billion for the Clean Energy Accelerator. But that is sort of the international component of the U.S. effort when it comes to clean energy financing. And we look forward to working with our partners around the world to advance those efforts as well, whether it's under the umbrella of Power Africa or other initiatives that we've seen internationally. So let me end there. Professor, thank you again for hosting this panel, and to my other two colleagues that were here, thank you very much for your leadership. And I do look forward to the time when we can meet in person to discuss these issues, and hopefully with the good news that the United States Congress has finally enacted a green bank after our efforts beginning in 2008. So good to be with you, and best wishes to all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Van Hollen, and thanks for all your contribution. I think because Mr. Ambroise Fayol also has to leave fairly soon, I would like to ask, thank you very much, Senator, again.
Thank you, and I apologize for having to leave, but we have some votes.
So I think that the question that the senator left for you to answer, Mr. Fayol, was how does the European Investment Bank help achieve international climate and development objectives? You could kindly answer that.
Thank you, Professor. It was a pleasure to see you, even if I would prefer to see you in real, and thanks a lot for the invitation. What I would say is, the European Investment Bank is the Public Bank of the European Union. So it is an institution that finances projects that have a European content, be it for innovation, for infrastructure, for example, for SMEs. And actually, over the last 2 years, we have transformed the EIB to become the EU Climate Bank. So in line with the European Green Deal of the European Commission, that has a target of making Europe the first continent to be climate neutral by 2050. And in line with that, we have proposed to our board, which is representatives from the 27 member states of the European Union, a strategy to increase and strengthen our climate ambition. And in doing that, what we have tried to do, and it was approved at unanimity by all member states, and to get there, what we have tried to combine is 3 things. A good level of ambition, quite good level of ambition, a pragmatism in implementing it, and also making sure that we have a transition on the climate transition that is just. So in terms of ambition, what we have tried to do is to put both quantitative and qualitative targets. In terms of quantitative targets, the most important one is that by 2025, we need to increase the share of what we finance with climate content from 25% minimum to 50% minimum. And we finance basically 60 billion euros project per year. So it means we need to move from 15 billion to 30 billion projects every year. And in terms of qualitative, we have put in place a rule that even for the projects that do not have a climate content, we want to make sure that they are not basically going at the opposite of the projects that we do with supporting climate ambition. The pragmatism, I would say, has been done in 2 kind of ways. What we have done is we have put a number of assumptions in our strategy, but we have at the same time made sure that we would review it regularly to make sure that if things move in any direction, we can revisit the level of ambition that we have, and we can revisit the conditions for the climate bank roadmap. And the second thing that we have put is we have put specific emphasis on those entities and those companies that have the most to achieve. And in particular, with high emitting companies, we didn't treat them the same way as we would treat, for example, SMEs. And finally, a big importance was attached to making the transition just. And that means there are geographies in Europe that have more to achieve in terms of coming to the level of climate neutrality. Those geographies, for example, in Eastern Europe, will need to be supported more in terms of financing, more in terms of advisory, more in terms of technical assistance. And that's the combination of these ambitious targets, pragmatism in reviewing the situation more or less every year, and to have a just transition that I think was the recipe for all the member states to approve this strategy that is consistent with the climate neutrality that is the objective of the European Union.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe before you leave, if I can just ask you 2 very brief questions. One, could you very briefly explain how the EIB has pioneered the instrument of shadow price of carbon? Because I think that may be of interest also for our American colleagues. And perhaps also, if you could highlight some success stories of the EIB, particularly impressive, I think, is helping fund the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, which is now being used globally.
Yeah, certainly, Professor. Actually, the shadow price of carbon measures basically the cost to society associated from an emission of greenhouse gas from a project. And what we do when we assess a project internally, be it for infrastructure, be it for innovation, especially for infrastructure, we want to make sure that we have a proper assessment of its profitability. And we see that not only from a financial point of view, we are a bank, but also from an economic point of view, social and environmental. And to measure the environmental part of a project, what we do is we apply a shadow cost of carbon. And to make sure this is the cost of carbon that basically is consistent with the trajectory of reaching the goals of 1.5 degree in the Paris Agreement. And to do that, it means that we need to have a cost of carbon, a shadow price of carbon, that is increasing with time going by. It is currently 80 euros per ton of CO2. It will be 250 euros by 2030 and 800 euros in 2050. And that is reviewed actually every year. And what it means is that it allows us to do something that is extremely important, which is that we don't say, well, we are not going to finance, for example, roads anymore. But we say, when we assess if we are going to finance roads or not, we will apply this shadow price of carbon to see if this is consistent with the objectives of climate that we have set in Europe. And our hope is that with the number of electric cars that is increasing very sharply, actually it allows us to make the investment in infrastructure also possible. So that is for the shadow price of carbon. And if I may, on Beyond Tech, I mean, this is exactly the kind of investment that we will continue to do. It is not green, but it is extremely important for financing priorities in Europe. And actually, Beyond Tech, we have developed over the last years a portfolio of investments in small companies that are biotech, that are medtech, and where we think they could be champions in very, very, pointed skills or specialties. And actually, Beyond Tech came to us in 2019, and they said, well, we are very much interested if we can get a financing from the Bank of the European Union. We have developed a technology for treating cancer that is quite revolutionary, and it is called the mRNA. We had never heard of that at the time, and it was actually found by the specialists at the bank quite convincing. And when they came last year to say, well, we think actually with this new technology, we could probably apply it to COVID. We jumped on it, and we made a big loan to support the research to see the extent to which, and it was very successful, obviously, and then partnered with Pfizer, the mRNA technology applied to COVID. This is something that is a great achievement. We are very pleased of that. Let me finish, maybe, Stephanie, if you allow me, by saying that what the senator said is also very important. When we look at the green, we need to look at the best way to make the leverage of our investment, to make sure that we can bring the private sector as much as possible in our investment. And for that, we need to work on which is the best structure of our products that allow this leverage to be as high as possible. And what we are working on these days is also on capital markets that apply to green. So how can we develop green bonds? And not only green bonds in Europe, or there are many green bonds in Europe, in the US, in Asia, there are much less in Africa. And this is something that we would like to develop for African financial institutions that have also green projects that could be financed with green bonds. And finally, what we're also working on is to try to have many institutions are now developing green trajectories, and great. What we need to make sure is that when we talk about that, we speak the same language. And that is what we are working on currently in Europe, to make sure that we understand the same thing about what is green and what is not. and also for the green bonds, for example, to make sure that the standards also are more or less the same, so that we can speak the same language. I think it's going to be very important also as a matter of credibility for the public opinion and for an investor community. And I'll stop there, Stephanie. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your excellent presentation, and all the best with all your important work.
Thank you so much.
Now we have our last speaker, very important contribution by Remy Rieu. And Senator Van Hollen wanted to ask you what are, particularly in your experience as a chair of IDFC, what are the key lessons from the experience of development banks, which is relevant today for a new US National Green Bank? And I can't think of anybody who could answer this better than you, Remy.
Thanks a lot, Professor. Dear Stephanie, and it's a great pleasure and honor, of course, to be with Senator Van Hollen, Ambroise, Jeff, and you all from the Green Bank Design Summit. I remember you were in Paris for the initial summit 2 years ago. And I'm very glad to see this coalition, this initiative grow so nicely worldwide, but also in the US. The first lesson, as demonstrated by Ambroise right now, is that public development banks are, I would say, alive and kicking everywhere. In the world, in each and every country. So you mentioned the figures that we gathered last year. As you know very well, Stephanie, we are in the process of revising, recounting it. And if I'm right, there is now, we have identified more than 500 public development banks in the world. It's not 11, it's probably more than 13 trillion total assets. And as you know, rapidly expanding. So probably more now than 10% of global investments each year. And with very significant groups of institutions, of course, Europe, there are 27, the PDBs of the 27 European Union members accounts for more than 4 trillion in assets, with EIB at the center of this group being the largest multilateral development banks. China also, I mean, somehow the Chinese public development banks look at the same financial size as European entities. And Ambroise was mentioning Africa, other regions in the world. So this is something everybody has to consider, the magnitude of it, the importance of it. And of course, these institutions are particularly well suited in the situation, in the crisis we're in, because their thesis in the financial system is precisely to answer the current health and socio-economic crisis, playing their counter-cyclical role, and at the same time also thinking long-term and implementing the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. And it helps, I think, all of us go beyond maybe binary stances. I mean, thinking that in a financial system, you only have the fiscal capacity of the governments on one side and the markets on the other side. It's not what history, financial history is teaching us. I mean, there have been all the time connectors between public and private, between short-term and long-term, between global liquidities and projects, between now more and more international and national transitions, and this comes very strong in the discussion right now. we are very interested in what is happening in the US right now. The US, of course, is an integral part of this movement. I'm not going back to the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, but when KfW was created, Stephanie, I mean, RFC was also alive and kicking, if I'm right, very large in the US financial system. I'm not referring to Freddie and Fannie, but somehow we can see them as habitat banks. I mean, being public banks, and you know how large they are, how systemic and important they are in the US financial system. I'm only referring to what is happening with all the green banks that are emerging right now at state level and hopefully at the federal level. This is so important, and this is such a strong signal for the whole world to understand this and support it. And I really hope that this clean energy and sustainability accelerator will happen with the size that is envisaged. And of course, and I close here, if so, I mean, we are here for you. I mean, all of us in the world, we stand ready to cooperate and discuss with Senator Van Hollen, but also with all US colleagues in this finance in common coalition, in this finance in common movement we launched last November. So it was sorry, it's here. It was the first ever global gathering of these hundreds of public development banks. It was a huge success, actually, a signal of hope at the heart of the pandemic. And somehow we have created this global forum to exchange our experiences that are, of course, idiosyncratic. They have to. We have to be suited to our national setting, but where there are also lessons, good practices to be shared on governance, on mandates, on the legal and regulatory environments, on taxonomy, as Ambroise was referring to, and many dimensions, because all these institutions are asking themselves, what is their use? How can they play a stronger role right now? So please, let's join the Finance in Common movement. We are extremely honored and happy to have you on board. I mean, the Green Bank movement, the US Green Bank movement was there actually last November.
Well, thank you very much, Remy, for your eloquent presentation and also your generous offer to American colleagues for continuing to transfer this international experience to the US when and if they need it. And I was just wondering, there are no questions in the Q&A, but I wanted to ask you a question that Senator Van Hollen was very interested in, was what are the main challenges and achievements from your experience at AFD and also particularly at IDFC chair to maximize impact on this low carbon transition by operations of development banks, also, of course, combined with the private finance, which they help catalyze. So if you could, in a couple of minutes, kindly start a reply to that.
Of course, climate and the green transition is a common thread between all of us. And of course, there are other dimensions of the crisis, biodiversity, inequalities, that the group is exploring over time. But we are doing a lot on climate, and we can do more. And we took actually a very strong position in the joint declaration that was published and that you can find on the Finance in Common website last November. So all the public banks, they committed to align their activities with the objective of the Paris Agreement. All of us, we are pushing for energy transition and to manage and change our way of doing business and investing and exit from coal financing, of course, in the perspective of COP26. And all of us, the objective of the USDFC was mentioned by Senator Van Hollen, 33%, but all of us, we are setting new targets to allocate our funding to environmental and climate protection projects. At AFD, I'm heading, we are at 50% of climate co-benefits now for about a decade. So these institutions, they have accumulated a lot of very concrete experience on what the transition mean that we can share, of course, with all private colleagues. And this was the question. The question is, of course, the public banks, they are about 10%. So now what about the 90 other percent? And could we envisage, imagine, deploy tools that are at scale of the challenge? And of course, on the mobilization of private finance, there are three dimensions. Of course, first, on the liability side, what we can do to develop green bonds, sustainable bonds, and transform the financial markets. And for instance, at AFD, we supported DBSA, the Development Bank of South Africa. That was the first financial institution in the country to issue a green bond. 50% of our own financing is already sustainable or green for AFD. And you know what KfW, what EIB, what the World Bank, of course, which is part of the club, have done for to structure this market. That's on the liability side. On the asset side, of course, you know, we are all inventing, I would say, various schemes of blended finance, being credit lines, guarantees, de-risking, other de-risking instruments that we have to put at the right scale. And last, of course, a lot to share on the methodological side, beyond our own financing. Of course, probably because we are public, there's trust in our institutions that probably, and I hear it from colleagues on the private side, that make us well positioned to originate somehow the methodologies on what sustainable development investment really means. Of course, not for ourselves, but to share with all other financiers, and to even reinforce this trust in the group. Of course, as you know, and it came out of the summit last year, the Finance in Common Summit, we are asking for a stronger mandate. So we really want the G20, the UN, the G7, all our shareholders gathering at the global level or in each and every country to strengthen our mandate, to make it greener, to make it fairer, in order to be even more exemplary and give us the traction on other actors like never. So that's on the mandate. And what we are also asking, of course, for more resources, more capital everywhere, but of course with a specific attention to Africa, as Ambroise said it, because there are 100 public banks in Africa, but they are too small. and they have to be recapitalized or reinforced. And I just want to put in the discussion today that we have a unique opportunity right now because of this SDR issuance at the IMF level. So if our governance, if we can propose a way to have these very precious resources strengthen our balance sheet. So I don't know if it can be capital or tier 2 or precious resources, because we are the institutions that can leverage these resources. And so if we find the right technical way to do it, I mean, the 100 billion of Copenhagen, we can do it in a second. I mean, of course, the financing of African economies can make a giant step if we allocate part of these resources to leverage public development banks in the region, being international or even more interesting, national and regional African institutions. And the same for all regions. So please, let's, of course, the SDR are reserves. I mean, they are to finance imports. They have, of course, to help finance vaccines and essential goods right now. But please, let's try to allocate part of this $650 billion to channel them to this global public financial infrastructure we are in the process of creating. And please help us, and this is what you are doing today, help us have a voice in the global governance, the voice of public investment, as simple as that, to have as vibrant and constructive a dialogue, well, with the voice of the public banks, the monetary policy, with the voice of the governments, I mean, the fiscal capacity and the regulatory capacity, and the voice of private finance, of course, that in the end, we are working with. So sorry, a bit of a global landscape on what is happening, but you see how excited and positive I am. As always, in a crisis and when recovering from a crisis, this is the moment when public banks are the most helpful. And this is the moment of huge transformation. This is the moment when a new architecture can be revealed, understood, and supported. And of course, if the US can support it, can set a reference in the way you are financing your own economy, it will have a global echo, believe me, and it will help us tremendously.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Remy. Marvelous, because you not only gave us an inspiring vision, but you also provided concrete mechanisms like using part of the SDR issue to perhaps help capitalize or fund in other ways development banks, and particularly to help regions like Africa where there's such a dramatic need. So thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you to all the other speakers and colleagues like Jeff and all the organizers for what I thought was a really great session. So looking forward to seeing you soon again, and maybe already in the context of having already a US Green Bank. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you all. Bye-bye. Thank you, Stephanie. See you soon.